Nearly a dozen explosions were reported in Russian-controlled territory between the previous night and the following. In the first year of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, expectations for the final outcome favored the belief that a decisive victory for Ukraine was imminent. You can show your support for us by subscribing in the second year of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, the war's fraught with unpredictability, and it is difficult to imagine how Ukraine could emerge victorious, a drawn-out conflict that is fought to the death. When it comes to trust, morale, and military assistance, the Western world is taking up arms with an unwavering will. Within the context of this conflict, Ukraine possesses a great number of distinct advantages. The determined army of Kiev, which will continue to give its all throughout the conflict, as well as the consistent support that this army receives from its Western allies, strengthens Ukraine's resolve to win. In particular, the United States and NATO are ramping up the amount of military assistance they are providing to the Kiev government. The dramatic escalation is highlighted by the fact that Ukraine has decided to send Abrams tanks and longer-range missiles because they are of the opinion that they can win the war. Since the unexpected success of Ukraine's auto-military offensive in both the northeastern and southern parts of the scope of NATO's assistance has significantly expanded. This has occurred as a direct result of Ukraine regaining control of key areas of territory from Russian occupation forces, which were supported by the assistance of Western countries such as the United States, and especially NATO. There are multiple occasions where the Ukrainian armed forces were victorious over the Russian army on the front. The conflict in the eastern part of Ukraine has become more violent over the course of the past few months. In the first weeks of this month, Russian forces suffered heavy losses in weeks of fighting around the city of Olyr, which is located southwest of Bakhmut. These losses have raised questions about Moscow's ability to sustain the conflict. In January, Russian forces took control of the town of Sol, which was a step forward in their fight for the city of Bakhmut, which is located nearby. A forthcoming offensive in the Donbass region is being planned. Even though the Russian army has suffered significant casualties, there is still time for it to make progress in the war and gain ground. The violence of the conflict is spreading to the eastern part of Ukraine, which is heating up in the Ukrainian port city of Mar, which is currently held by the Russian military and is the location of one of the most infamous battles in history. There were almost a dozen explosions earlier in the day yesterday. The Ukraine discovered a way to launch an attack behind Russian lines, which resulted in a number of unexplained explosions. Nearly a dozen explosions were reported in Russian-controlled territory between the previous night and the following. This occurred 6 months after the intense Russian siege of the southern port city of Mariupol was ultimately unsuccessful. Reports and videos indicate that Russian-occupied territory in the regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, and Kherson was also struck by the attack after taking control of Mariupol in the spring. The more interesting question is probably not which targets the Ukrainian forces were able to hit, but rather how they were able to hit. It appears that Vasco gradually transformed the city into a large garrison because he believed that it was beyond the range of powerful US-supplied missiles that were located close to the ruined mining town of Val, which was the closest Ukrainian stronghold. However, the exiled city council stated that there were at least 11 explosions that took place the previous day according to the council. One of them was responsible for the destruction of a Russian ammunition depot in the vicinity of the airport in Mariupol, as well as an ammunition depot belonging to the Russian army in the vicinity of the airport was very close to losing because of the Ukrainian missiles. When the missiles were within range of the ammunition depot, explosions took. The intensity of the explosion reached gigantic proportions as a result of the detonation of the ammunition that was stored in the Russian arsenal. As the Russian arsenal collapsed to the ground in Mariupol, the heat from the flames warmed the skies above the city. With this most recent attack by Ukraine, the Russian occupying troops on the territory of Dir have received yet another incurable wound in addition to the occupation that they have established. In addition, the Ukrainian armed forces launched missile attacks, which caused damage to the steel mills. On the other hand, it was not the first time during the war that reports of explosions were heard behind the lines of the opposing army. In the past, Ukrainians fought against the invaders using drones, private operators who worked behind enemy lines, and a large network of partisans who were loyal to Kiev. The General Staff of the Democratic Republic of the Ukraine announced that the Ukrainian Air Force alone was responsible for 8 attacks on Russian temporary bases, troops, and 2 attacks on the positions of Russia's entire aircraft and missile system were carried out. However, the local administrator that Moscow appointed to Mariupol claims that everything is fine and that Russian air defense has shut down due to Ukrainian UAVs attacking the city during. This claim was made by the administrator after Moscow sent them to Mariupol. The port city of Mariupol, which is currently the site of a violent conflict, is an important strategic location for Russia. There are 4 primary reasons why Russia's capture of the port cities constitutes a strategic victory for them. and this is a devastating blow for, to begin, the role that Mariupol plays in securing a land corridor between Crimea and Donbass is extremely significant, despite the fact that it only takes up a very small portion of land on the map. The city of Mariupol is currently acting as a roadblock for Russian forces as they attempt to evacuate the Chian-P. If Mariupol is captured by the police, Russia will also take full control of more than 80% of Ukraine's coastline along the Black Sea. This will prevent maritime trade and further isolate Russia. The second reason is to strangle the economy of Ukraine using the rest of the world's resources. Mariupol has long been recognized for its significance as a strategic port on the Sea of Visa, which is a section of the Black. In addition to being home to a significant iron and steel manufacturing facility, it is the deepest and therefore the largest port in the Azov Sea region. Under normal circumstances, Minneapolis is the primary export hub for steel, coal, and corn for the Ukraine to consumers all over the world, including those in the Middle East. If they were to lose Mariupol, it would be a devastating blow to what was. As for the third reason, it gives Russia the opportunity to spread propaganda about itself by affecting the Ukrainian economy. The city of Minneapolis is the location of a Ukrainian paramilitary unit known as the Azure Brigade. This unit got its name from the Sea of Azov, which is the body of water that links Mariupol to the rest of the Black Sea. Extremists from the far right, such as neo-Nazis, have historically been members of the Azure. Even though they made up a relatively insignificant portion of Ukraine's fighting forces, it turned out to be an effective propaganda tool for Moscow. In the event that Russia is successful in capturing a sizable number of Azure Bridge fighters alive, it is highly likely that those fighters will be featured in media outlets controlled by the Russian state as part of an ongoing information war to discredit Ukraine. And it's, last but not least, the conquest of Mariupol by Russia will be psychologically significant for both sides in this conflict. The conquest of Mariupol by Russia will provide serious morale for Russia on both sides of this conflict. A successful Russian offensive in Mariupol would give the Kremlin the opportunity to demonstrate to the Russian people that Russia is winning. All of this has historical significance for President Putin, for whom this conflict feels very personal. It is viewed in schools and he is making progress. He considers the land along the coast of the Black Sea in Ukraine to be part of a region known as Novara, which is Russian territory that dates back to the empire of the 18th century. Putin and his allies want to bring back the idea of rescuing Russians from the tyranny of a government in Kiev that is aligned with Western. At this point, Mariupol is the main obstacle to accomplishing this objective. The fall of Mariupol, on the other hand, will be a devastating blow for the Ukrainian people. This will be true not only in political and economic terms, but also in the minds of the people who defend their country on the ground. It would appear that the Ukraine is set on defending Mariupol with all of its determination and not ceding control of this region to. The Ukrainian armed forces are continuing to fight for Mariupol, and they are not allowing the Russian army to gain ground in other parts of the front lines. In a related development, the days were extremely busy in three critical areas: kayaking in eastern Ukraine, cities of Luhansk, and there has been no let-up in the pace of the missile attacks that Russian troops are launching against the civilian infrastructure in these regions. As Ukrainian authorities issued nationwide weather warnings and warnings of a large-scale rain of missiles in the car shortly before 11 am, half a dozen thunderstorms echoed through the city. Explosions were also heard in the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv, which is still under government control. This occurred as the city was undergoing widespread weather warnings and warnings of a large-scale rain of missiles. There was an initial lack of clarity regarding what had. After just a few minutes, the severe weather alert was turned off. There was no way to tell if the missiles that were hitting the city were the beginning of a larger attack or if there were more because of its proximity to the Russian border. The city is frequently targeted by missiles with shorter ranges that are unable to reach cities further away, such as Kyiv, Ukraine's capital. Following the assaults by the Russian military, the Ukrainian armed forces went into. The Ukrainian Air Force carried out 16 airstrikes in Russian-controlled territory. There was a concentration of both personnel and military equipment. In addition, an assault on the entire aircraft missile system was carried out by the Ukrainian Air Force. The Russian invasions of 11 settlements in the eastern part of the Luhansk and Donetsk regions were successfully repelled by the Ukrainians. In recent days, Ukrainians have claimed to have detected an increase in enemy activity, including frequent flights of Russian aircraft, launching missiles and balloons hovering over Ukraine, possibly as a decoy to confuse air defenses. Ukrainians say they have seen this activity. Celebrations of the victory over the enemy are currently being held in Moscow's Kyiv. Salmonella tests have suggested that Russia may soon launch a barrage that is larger than usual. This would not only be to commemorate the anniversary of the invasion on February 24th, but it would also be an attempt to distract from the military setbacks that Russia has experienced. At the moment, the primary focus of Moscow's offensive operations is still in the eastern and southern regions, where Russian forces are attempting to penetrate Ukrainian defenses from 5 different directions. There is still a relatively short amount of time left until spring arrives and the temperature begins to rise. In addition, the east and south of Ukraine will experience a significant escalation in the level of violence experienced. In the coming time, we will wait and see what kind of new dimension the bloodshed caused by the various conflicts will bring to the conflict in Ukraine. We appreciate you keeping an eye on us. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine has resulted in both losses and gains over the past year. Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, made the announcement that his country's armed forces had begun a military operation in the Donbass region during the evening of February 23, 2022. Putin's military operation was a form of expression that had been censored in order to conceal the idea of invading. This is due to the fact that it has been widely acknowledged across the globe that the Russian army has been conducting attacks against civilians and carrying out a variety of other inhumane acts for the past year. Fighting erupted in the Ukrainian cities of Donetsk, Luhansk, and Kharkiv in the early hours of February 24th. The level of violence in the confrontations escalated throughout. Putin believed that he would be able to occupy the territories he desired in a matter of weeks, and that Ukrainian President Zelensky would submit, but Putin was confronted with an unforeseen reality. The Ukrainian people and Zelensky put up a valiant fight against the Russian occupants of their country. At the start of the conflict, the Ukrainian army took a defensive stance. However, they quickly shifted to an offensive stance, becoming so aggressive that their attacks extended all the way to Crimea, which was occupied by the Russian army in 2014. By asserting that the conflict began in Crimea and will come to an end with the conquest of Crimea, Zelensky, a leader of the Ukrainian government, demonstrated his resolve to fight the occupant. The nations of the West and Europe, unable to remain silent in the face of Putin's inhumane attempt to occupy Ukraine, have provided financial assistance to the country. It was enough to corner the Russian invaders thanks to the support of Western and European countries. The determination of Ukrainian leaders, including Zelensky, the power of the army, and the faith of Let's conduct an in-depth analysis of the major assaults mounted by the Ukrainian army against the invading Russian forces. A quick refresher is in order before we dive into an analysis of the developments that have occurred during the first year of the Russia-Ukraine war. As members of the United Daily News family, we will continue to report on the conflict in Russia and Ukraine in a way that is both accurate and object, and we will share all the details of the conflict with you. You can show your support for our whole team by clicking the Super Thanks button, which will acknowledge everyone who was involved in the production of these reports. The submersion of the Kerch Bridge in the depths of the Black Sea was unquestionably the most significant assault carried out by the Ukrainian army in the past 12. In addition, this attack took place just one day after Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, celebrated his birthday on October 8. As a way of celebrating Vladimir Putin's birthday, the Ukrainian army carried out a bomb attack on the Kerch Bridge. The fact that the Russian army was forced to suffer a significant reverse as a result of the destruction of this bridge is due to the fact that the Kerch Bridge was the only bridge that connected Russia to Crimea. Almost immediately after he invaded Crimea, in 2014, the leader of Russia, Vladimir Putin, issued an order for the construction of the Kerch Bridge. With the help of this bridge, Vladimir Putin intended to transport ammunition and other supplies from Russia to the territories in Ukraine that he intended to. But the operation that was carried out by the Ukrainian army was so successful that it buried the Kerch Bridge along with Putin's plan in the depths of the sea. Another significant victory for the Ukrainian army was the liberation of the city of Kherson from Russian occupation. The Russian military announced that it had taken control of Kherson within the first few months of the occupation. However, in the fall, the Russian occupiers in Kherson were surprised by a major assault that was launched against them. The fact that Kherson was one of the few port cities in Ukraine gave it a significant amount of importance, not only for exports, but also for access to the Black Sea through the Dnieper River. Therefore, the Ukrainian army carried out a number of offensive operations throughout the month of, which resulted in the complete withdrawal of the Russian invaders. The plans that Vladimir Putin, the leader of Russia, had to expand into Ukrainian territory through force have been foiled. During the course of the year-long conflict, the Ukrainian army presented Russia's army with a historic challenge. Mariupol and Bakhmut are the cities that best represent the spirit of the Re. A UF steel plant in Mariupol was described as a symbol of resistance by the international press. This was in reference to the Ukrainian armed forces at this plant. UF troops from the Ukrainian National Guard successfully defended against a number of assaults carried out by Russian invaders. The ongoing fighting in the region has demonstrated that the Russian military's claims that they have taken control of the city of Mariupol are, despite the fact that they continue to make these claims. The city of Bakhmut was the target of yet another hoax announcement of capture perpetrated by the Russian occupiers. Nevertheless, Bakhmut is a city in which the Ukrainian army defeated the Russian invaders and established itself as a historical force to such an extent that the Russian army was unsuccessful in its attempt to take the city despite sending thousands of soldiers there beginning in the deployment of Wagner Group soldiers in the direction. Obama was also unsuccessful in a last-ditch effort. Prisoners from Russian prisons were granted their freedom and instructed not to engage in combat, in an act of resistance that will be remembered for generations to come. The Ukrainian army in blackout was successful in destroying thousands of invading Russian soldiers, as well as tons of them. Major offensive operations against the invaders were organized by the Ukrainian army in the first few days of the year 2023. The Russian military base was destroyed in the first few hours of the new year in the first of these operations, which was the explosion of the base. This particular military base was significantly larger than any of the occupiers' other bases. According to reports, over 700 Russian soldiers and 3 senior Russian commanders were stationed at the Maka base. In addition to that, a portion of the military base served as a storage facility for the ammunition. As a holiday present, the Ukrainian army has given the Russian invaders some HIMARS missiles. Mary C. At the same time that the missiles struck the base, the city of Machika was subjected to an unprecedentedly loud explosion sound, and residents could see flames rising into the sky. It was reported that as a direct consequence of this explosion, approximately 500 of the Russian invaders' soldiers were killed, and numerous tons of ammunition and equipment were rendered use. The most significant headquarters of the Chechen leader Kadi were destroyed by an explosion in the first few days of 2023 as part of yet another significant operation that was carried out by the Ukrainian army. How did the Rose headquarters in the city of Sizia, which is situated in the southern region of Ukraine, get blown up as a result of the Ukrainian army's bombardment? It was reported that this attack resulted in the deaths of hundreds of Chechen. Citation needed. According to reports from the area, this assault resulted in the deaths of between 200 and 500 Chechen soldiers as a direct result of the sanctions imposed by countries in the West and Europe. Russia has not only suffered a loss of military personnel and ammunition, but has also experienced a significant loss of financial resources. Russia held the record for having the most sanctions placed against it in the annals of world. This served as further evidence that the international community is united in its opposition to Russia's occupation of Ukraine and in its support for Ukraine. Let's take a look at how the economy of Russia has completely collapsed. The Russian Ministry of Finance issued a statement regarding the country's monetary shortfall at the beginning of the month of January. As a direct result of this, Russia's budget deficit increased to 1.76 trillion rubles in January, which is equivalent to 24.8 billion. Because of the widening gap between revenues and expenditures, the Russian economy has regressed by 25 years since 1998. This is the first time that Russia has had a budget deficit of such a significant M. Additionally, a statement was issued by the ministry regarding gas and oil tax revenues, which are the most significant components of the Russian economy. It was reported in January 2023 that taxes on gasoline and oil had decreased by 46% in comparison to the previous year's total amount. On the other hand, it was stated that the increase in budget expenditures was 59%. Russia is experiencing a severe decline on both the military and economic fronts. It is highly unlikely that Putin will keep the occupation going with this kind of burnout. On the other hand, the Ukrainian army continues to press its advantage over the Russian army, which is seeing its strength gradually increase. What are your thoughts on the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which has now entered its second? How much longer do you anticipate that this war will last? What are your thoughts on the fact that the Ukrainian army has been successful in their offensive operations? Please enlighten us with your thoughts. Keep up with us here for further updates. The ATP Daily News YouTube channel owns these videos and all of their associated intellectual property. There is no need to rely on any other social media public. Our Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook usernames are all listed on the @Daily News website. We take legal action against every website and channel that utilizes it without our authorization. Nobody knows how much longer Russia will be able to continue functioning normally despite this blow. The number of losses that Putin sustains is without. As a result of this war, which is becoming increasingly intense on a daily basis, Ukraine has dealt a significant blow to Russia. Putin is acting increasingly irrationally with this move. The action taken by Ukraine has given it a significant advantage over Russia in the ongoing conflict. The Black Sea waters were the location of a very significant operation that took place during the Russia-Ukraine. The Black Sea itself served as the location of the operation since the very beginning of the war. These waters have been of critical importance to both sides. In the past, a much greater number of activities were carried out in these waters along the coast of Odessa, which is located in Ukraine and leads to the Black. By carrying out this operation, Ukraine was successful in dealing a significant blow, not only to the military power of Russia, but also to the country's economic power. It is common knowledge that natural gas, which Russia has an abundance of due to its strategic location, represents one of the country's most lucrative sources. Russia has been selling this energy through natural gas pipelines to almost every corner of the world and to many places such as Western countries for a significant amount of time. Even before the war broke out, the natural gas drilling ships operating in the Black Sea were Russia's most lucrative source of income. Russia, which has been continually organizing naval attacks in the Black Sea near Odessa's borders, is currently in violation of the seas. It is a very unfortunate turn of events. This time, Russia, which has natural gas drilling ships off the coast of Odessa, has had military ships alongside the drilling ships since the beginning of the conflict, in order to intervene immediately if there are any issues with the ships or any attacks on the ships, particularly these ships. Attack from out of nowhere from the Black Sea on the city of Odessa, which did not result in any casualties in Ukraine, but did result in the evacuation of these cities. The Ukrainian government had no intention of letting Russia get away with this. Following the meetings that were organized, the Ukraine made the decision to carry out a significant operation and immediately put its plan into both the drilling ships that Russia uses off the coast of Odessa to extract natural gas and the military ships that are stationed there to protect them, were planned to be destroyed by the HIMARS missiles that Russia has received from the United States in order to stock its arsenal. Following all of these assaults by Russia, it was time for Ukraine to cease its operations. The use of unmanned aerial vehicles (UAVs) to gather intelligence was the initial step in this professionally developed plan. Following the successful collection of intelligence by UAVs, Ukrainian forces started to advance their positions closer to the coast of the Black Sea. The barrels of the HIMARS, which had been pointed in the direction of the ships, whose positions had been determined, were ready and waiting to be fired at the city before it was evacuated. Following what was perceived as some benefit for Ukraine from Russia's attacks on the city of Odessa, which were directed at him, the Ukrainian people insulted him. Certain locations within the city that had been evacuated started waiting for the optimal moment to fire their HIMARS, which were already loaded and ready to go. They had no idea what was going on, but 6 Russian drilling ships and 8 military ships that were working in the Black Sea were. When these naval units finally became aware of what had occurred to them, it was already too late to do anything about it. Zelensky gave the order to press the fighting button on HIMARS, and it was carried out the drill. The ship and the military ships that were working at various points came under fire from the HIMARS, which showered them with missiles. This operation was obviously a success, as evidenced by the series of massive explosions and clouds of fire that followed. The ships that were drilling for natural gas had warehouses that were completely stocked with natural gas, which is what caused the massive fires that broke out. The sounds of the explosions caused by the HIMARS firing. Their missiles were combined with the sounds of the natural gas. Several explosions were reported in the warehouse. With the first wave of missiles launched, ours was able to destroy 3 drill ships in addition to 5 military ships. The Russian military ships were unable to comprehend what had taken place, so they steered the barrels of the 3 ships that had managed to avoid being destroyed in the initial explosion in the direction of Ode. However, due to the careful planning and execution of the Ukraine strategy, which consisted of stationing ours inside the city that was evacuated, the missiles fired from the military ships did not cause any damage. As the explosions continued, the Russian soldiers were unable to see anything, so they used the boats that were on board to escape to the nearest shore, which was the coast of Odessa. The HIMARS let loose a second volley of the HIMARS missiles that were fired a second time were also successful in making a hit. The drill ships, whose tanks were full of natural gas, are to blame for the large explosions that occurred on the ships that shattered because they were the cause of the explosion. In fact, according to many of the statements that have been made, it was the fact that the target of the HIMARS missiles was a drill ship that made it possible for this significant blow to be. And after the explosion, the natural gas interacted with the explosion and exploded multiple times. After the second explosion, the military ships that had been standing next to the drill ships for the purpose of providing protection were also affected by these explosions and were destroyed. As a result of the fire and explosions, the eyes of the Russian soldiers who were attempting to flee were rendered. Those who attempted to cross the U.S. border by boat laid down their weapons and surrendered to the Ukrainian soldiers. They encountered many of the soldiers who were interrogated after the Russian soldier turned himself and said that the military ships there were not actually intended to ensure the security of the drilling ships, but rather that there was a plan to organize an attack on the city of Odessa on the Black Sea coast where the civilian population was. This information was revealed after the Russian soldier turned himself in. The fact that Ukraine has been able to achieve such a successful operation has also prevented Russia from launching its invasion as it was planned. The outcome of every operation that it has planned suggests that the war will soon come to an end with Ukraine emerging victorious and Russia being forced into a stalemate. This operation, which was carried out by the army had a significant impact all over the world. As a result of Ukraine's operation, it was demonstrated once more that Russia is unable to roam over the Black Sea as it pleases Ukraine at a time when Russia places such a high priority on its military. Russia was dealt a blow that was not only military in nature, but also economic in nature. This was caused by Ukraine's destruction of such a significant source of. The effects of industry were felt all over the world because of this. Russia was forced to halt its natural gas exports to many countries, despite the fact that Putin stated in a statement that this attack did not cause economic difficulties. Putin is currently dealing with significant financial challenges as a result of the sales. It is plain to see that Russia is having economic difficulties. These economic issues in Russia cannot be resolved in the broadest sense. The information that the people are unable to satisfy their fundamental requirements has quickly spread, as was evident in a great number of operations. It would appear that the weapons, ammunition, and materials that Russia has added to its military power by spending millions of dollars on are more useful for Ukraine. This particular one is included in this category. It is successful for Ukraine because at the conclusion of the conflict, it incorporates every resource discovered in the region where the operation is being organized and ports the damage that the conflict inflicts on. If Russia's military industry, on which Russia spends millions of dollars while working for Ukraine, could only be Russia's to a certain extent, then that would be a problem. Local populations, with support from the rest of the world, have been urging Vladimir Putin to put an end to the war. Putin, who has ignored all of the warnings, is putting the war he is leading, which he is currently leading, in grave danger of making strategic mistake. It is said that the Russian forces do not have sufficient training for the war and are becoming increasingly incompetent. This is due to the fact that the Russian forces have been defeated in all of their invasion attempts. Wagner's founder, Evgeny Ferguson, is quoted in his statements released after each and every Russian operation as claiming that the Russians are incompetent, and that the operation should have been left to them. As a direct result of these statements and the arrest of soldiers who are contemplating a coup, the number of military personnel currently detained in prison has reached a significant number. This is something that Putin continues to do every day in the army, out of fear of being removed from power. On the one hand, Putin was at a loss for what to do in response to the mounting pressure from the people. Every day there are new demonstrations demanding that Putin, who is responsible for bringing Russia to its current state in the war, and step down from his position as leader. Putin has not backed down from his harsh stance towards the protesters, and as a result, he is continuing to draw